After longtime Oakdale Police Chief Bill Sullivan retired last year, the department promoted within. We'll talk with the current chief, Nick Newton, in this half hour. After more than 20 years with the Oakdale Police Department, Nick Newton was designated as the new Chief of Police last fall. We're pleased to have him in studio today. Nick, thanks for joining us on Oakdale Update.
Thanks for the invite.
Oh, that's good. Okay, so let's tell me a little bit about yourself, your education and where you live and that sort of thing.
Sure. Yeah, I started working for Oakdale Police Department in 2001. I started working as a patrol officer. I spent time in a squad car, driving the streets, learning the city. Then I went to investigations and worked as an investigator for a couple of years. Then I was promoted to sergeant, and I spent a significant amount of time working as a patrol sergeant. Did that for 14 years.
Oh, that much?
Yes, and then in 2020, I was promoted to captain, and then not too long ago in the fall, I was hired as police chief. And over the years, I was a use of force instructor for our police department in addition to my other duties. Say about 10 years ago, I really dedicated myself towards education, becoming a lifelong learner. That led me to go back to school, attain a master's degree in criminal justice leadership.
Oh, good.
And then after some higher level training for law enforcement, I graduated from Northwestern University School of Police Staff and Command. And in 2019, I graduated from the FBI National Academy.
Mm-hmm. Can I mention about that? The FBI Academy, it seems that all good cops with a good career with police work all have attended the FBI Academy. What's it like there? What's that all about?
Yes, it was a privilege to be able to go to that training. Only about 2% or less of law enforcement professionals in the world get to attend that training.
Oh, really?
So, I spent 4 months out in Quantico, Virginia, and it's just a phenomenal experience to be in classrooms alongside with command level staff from a small department in, say, Oklahoma. And next to you sitting a captain from New York City Police Department.
That's great,
with,
isn't it?
36,000 police officers work there.
No kidding. Hey, so the instructors must be cream of the crop, I would reckon, huh?
Yeah. So they have FBI staff that teach coursework, and also they bring in other law enforcement professionals from all over the world to teach there.
Oh, that's great. I know I was in the Marine Corps, and I know some of our best officers had, at one time or another, gone through Quantico training, officer candidate training. Did you run into them at all while you were there, or is that separate?
We did cross paths just because, Quantico, the military base there, is a huge piece of property. And, there's FBI agents and other federal employees that are going there for training on the FBI campus. Then, of course, there's military bases all around the FBI Academy as well.
Yeah. Okay, so you replaced our good friend Bill Sullivan. What are your thoughts on Bill?
Oh, gosh, I worked for Bill my entire career.
Sure you did, yeah.
Just remarkable that he was in law enforcement for as long as he was. As police chief just in the city of Oakdale for almost 34 years. With him leaving, we also, over the last couple of years, had 120 years of experience leave.
Oh, my goodness, really?
With 4 people leaving that were there for a very long time.
Yeah, oh, my goodness. Yeah, Bill is quite a forceful personality, isn't he? I mean, when Bill comes in the room, he's there, right?
Oh, yeah, big. He's a big guy and big voice.
Absolutely. And I know Craig Waldron used him a lot in his classrooms at Hamlin University when Craig was teaching. He was a professor there, and he brought Bill in quite often to teach his classes, correct?
Yeah. So Sullivan did get into a teaching. He taught at Metro State University. He also taught at Northwestern University. So
Yeah.
he did get into the teaching quite a bit.
Yeah, good man. Anyway, okay, so let's talk about a high-profile case, George Floyd. Now, I mean, that just changed everything, didn't it? In the police work, in police departments, all over the world. I mean, the man caused, well, let's talk about that. So, what are your thoughts on that, of George Floyd?
Yes, that had just a major impact on law enforcement, our country, and actually across the world. You know, I remember that watching that video the first time. It was morning, we're starting shift, and me and several employees watched that video, and we all had the same response. We're just appalled.
Yeah.
Watching that video, just thinking, how is that even possible?
Yeah.
Because in Oakdale, we don't treat people that way. And in Oakdale, we don't train that way. So it's hard for us to even grasp how it even got to that point.
Well, actually, Minneapolis isn't trained that way either, as it turns out, right? I mean, it's just, we had a renegade cop there, don't you think?
Yeah, it sounds like that could be the case,
Yeah.
but it's just hard because when you look at use of force incidents in law enforcement, use of force is usually pretty ugly to watch. Things usually tend to happen very quickly. It's a very fast-paced, evolving situation. In this case with George Floyd, that was not a rapidly evolving situation. They had time, they had resources, so it was really hard to comprehend why they did that the way they did.
Absolutely. So how did you and the department react to this? I mean, did you gather them in and, you know, have a discussion about this at all, or what? Or just kept going business as usual?
Eventually we did, but here's the thing, Frank, we would have never imagined that the officer responsible for one of the most controversial police use force incidents in our nation's history would happen to live in Oakdale. So very quickly after that happened and that video was released and people watched and saw what happened, that generated a lot of activity for people to come to Chauvin's house. And they were protesting and in that neighborhood, so we didn't really have time to digest everything that happened.
Sure.
It just happened very quickly. None of us were aware that officer responsible, Chauvin, lived in Oakdale.
Okay, so there was a lot of demonstrations at his home in Oakdale. So how did you handle that? How did that go? How'd you handle that?
Yeah, it was a challenge, something that we typically don't deal with, especially in the suburbs. And really in the whole history of Oakdale Police Department, we've never had to respond to something like that. So really it was just approaching it kind of with some common sense approach, which was go there, start at the lowest level, which was just one police officer in uniform, who happened to be me, to make contact with the protest organizers and also get out the message that we support people that are here to peacefully protest. There are a lot of very good people there that were there for the right reasons, and just trying to establish the parameters of, hey, this is, you guys can do this, but once you start disrupting traffic flow or you start impacting the safety of this neighborhood, we're going to have to dedicate resources to mitigate this problem. And for the most part, people were very responsive and good with our response.
Oh, that's good. That's good. To
So
hear.
it worked out well.
Okay, that's what I wanted to ask you about. Across the nation, you know, all the protesters, they seem to be so much more violent than, I mean, just, it used to be, I'm from the Vietnam era, you know, they used to walk around with picket signs, and that was about it, but nothing like what was going on after this, after he was brought out, okay? So what are you seeing in that? Why are people so angry, I guess?
Yeah, it's hard to say. You know, I just look back on those times. There was so much uncertainty with everything that was going on at St. Paul, Minneapolis, and then, of course, in Oakdale, we had protests too. So just from our experience in Oakdale, there were a lot of people that were just there for the right reason, wanted their voices to be heard. Unfortunately, there were a few people during a couple of those days that they weren't there for the right reasons. They weren't there to peacefully protest. They were there to take advantage of the situation and cause chaos.
And it seems to be more prevalent too, doesn't it? I mean, there was a demonstration up in Hugo against Rick Kroll, Bob Crow, you know, and I mean, those people were angry, violent. I mean, they wanted to burn his house down. You know, what do you think of that? What do you think of that kind of reaction?
Yeah, it's disheartening, you know, that we just can't be civil in how we handle things. But, you know, kind of a unique thing, I guess, for being a suburban law enforcement department. You know, we operate much differently than a larger city. The culture of the organization is much different. So it was disheartening for us to have people that would show up on scene and they don't understand that, you know, every department has their own policy manual. They have their own culture, handle things differently, they train differently, and they have a different community that they all serve. So it was just disheartening that people would show up and just equate that a police officer from Oakdale, they viewed as being an officer from another department and viewed us as there protecting Chauvin and his home. But we weren't there for that. We're there to protect our community. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I had a lot of conversations with folks that lived in that area when this was all going on, and the fear was real. They were fearful of the unknown and what was going on in their neighborhood.
Sure. So because of Chauvin, how have you seen police work change? And I'm sure there's repercussions all across the nation, for sure. But what do you see in that, repercussions of that?
Well, every time there's a controversial police incident, it erodes public trust. And in law enforcement, to operate as a police department, you have to have public trust. So every time something happens like this, it's 2 steps backwards, right? And then we try to make that up and gain that trust back. So for us, in our department, we just tell our staff every day is a day to make a positive impression, to chip away at building trust with our community.
Okay. Now, I'm going to mention that I think there's going to be a vote coming up in November to get more money for your police department. And part of that is going to be to get cameras, I believe. You don't have cameras, is that correct?
For body cameras, yes.
For body
we
cameras.
would, we're in the research phase right now of body cameras, and we really hope to implement those in the near future.
Okay. So what are your thoughts on body cameras? How are they? How important are they or not? I mean, what's your thoughts?
You know, 15, 20 years ago, police officers in our department would have not been receptive to having cameras mounted on their shirt, recording them all the time.
Sure.
Right now, all of our staff want them. It's become an expectation, not just for our officers, but also for our community. There's oftentimes where members from the public will come into the police department and ask about body cameras, if we have any footage of an incident, and we don't. And it's kind of hard for them to believe
Sure.
that we're here in 2022 and you guys, we don't have body cameras.
Mm-hmm.
So that's something we really look forward to rolling out in the near future.
Mm-hmm. So this proposition that's coming up in November, it's a half cent per dollar or sales, something like that. But anyway, what are your plans, if that goes through, what are your plans, the money that you get, what are you going to do with it?
Well, we need a new police facility. You know, the current facility is, it's over 30 years old, and that was built for a time when they had 15 police officers and about 20 staff working out of the building. We currently have 34 licensed officers and 42 full-time employees working out of our police facility. So it's more than doubled. So we're really cramped, and we would really look forward to having the ability to have an efficient agency where officers can, one, park in a parking garage that the emergency vehicles are covered. Also have a break room for staff to actually take break in a location that's dedicated for break time. Have an area for them to train. That's really important. Right now we have to rent other places for classroom areas for us to do training for our staff. And I'd say probably the biggest thing for us is having the extra space, because we really need it. Mm-hmm. Emergency vehicles, they're parked outside all year round, and that's an office for a police officer. So when it's very warm outside, that vehicle needs to be running all the time for all the computers and technology to keep working. Same thing in the winter. So when they can actually have the ability to park in a temperature-controlled garage, we'll save on gas and wear and tear on vehicles. So there's a number of things we'd like to do to kind of make our police department a little more functional.
Sure. You know, now there's another cost with the cameras. Not only the cost of the cameras themselves, but isn't there some kind of a storage of the tapes or whatever? Is storage of the tapes, that costs money too, right?
Yeah, that's probably the biggest expense of it is the digital evidence storage. It's all stored on cloud-based storage system, and that's a big part of the cost for it. But in addition, that's where we'd also merge our other evidence that we keep on a computer server and host inside our police department.
Okay. So the other thing is, they're going to expand the building. Is that going to be attached to the city hall? That part of the police department is going to be expanded, or are they going to build a new building?
Yeah, so part of the plan is that there'd be new construction. That would be the parking garage and also kind of a second level above the garage. They would also be refurbishing the current police department. So it'd stay about the same the way it looks with how it currently is. And then there'd be an addition kind of going to the north and the west of the city hall.
Okay. Okay, let's talk about, I've interviewed Sheriff Starr, and nice man. I mean, he's just great. He knows his business. Do you have a lot of interaction with the sheriff and the sheriff's department?
Yes, Sheriff Starr is a well-respected law enforcement leader and have a very good working relationship, and we communicate all the time.
Okay, and what about other departments like Woodbury and North St. Paul and, well, Campbell doesn't have a police department, but anyway, what kind of interaction do you have with these other communities in their departments?
Yeah, we have very good working relationships with all the Washington County law enforcement agencies. In addition, just in general, other law enforcement agencies. And one example of that, when we were experiencing the social unrest in Oakdale after the George Floyd incident, we leaned on the sheriff's office and other Washington County agencies. But in addition, we had officers all the way up from northern Minnesota coming down to help us and provide resources.
Really? So I always question, if a crime's committed in North St. Paul, how do you get involved in it, or would you get involved in it? You know, they ran and went to Oakdale. How do you work something like that? Who's in charge, and what's the logistics in that?
Yeah, sure. It kind of depends on the situation. But
sure.
For example, if North St. Paul had a robbery, we scan their channel. So on the radios, we can hear what's going on. And if for some reason that wasn't, the officer didn't catch that, the dispatch center will notify Washington County Dispatch, who will alert our officers. And so they'd be aware of the situation, what's going on, and can also patch the radio channels between Ramsey County and Washington County for all the officers to communicate on one radio channel.
Okay. So if a bad guy is running and he's going through different communities, how do you work that? Do each community sends their cops after him? And what about where the crime first happened? Do they go too? And how many cops would you have chasing a bad guy if that's the case?
Yeah, it all depends on the situation. If it
Sure.
was a real serious crime, such as a murder, something like that, we would dedicate all the resources we could to help apprehend. And if it so happened that crime happened in another jurisdiction, we would secure that person, arrest them, and then turn that person over to the original agency. So they would book that person in a jail, and their prosecuting attorney would do all the charging.
Okay, so suppose there's a crime in Washington County, and the person ends up in St. Paul. So they make the arrest for whatever reason. They make the arrest. Where is he tried then? How do they work that?
Yeah, so it'd be dependent on the level of the crime and where it occurred. So if it was a felony level crime, that person would ultimately go back to Washington County Jail, and the Washington County Attorney's Office would be the ones prosecuting that case.
Okay, so basically where the crime was committed, it'd probably be their jurisdiction to take care of the crime, right?
Correct.
Okay, all right. So I'm going to ask you this. How has the face of crime changed since you became a patrol officer to the present day? And I'm talking about, let's say, the police work in general and Oakdale in particular.
Yes, a number of things have changed over the years, but I'd say probably the most pressing issue that's changed is the mental health calls for service, dealing with persons in crisis. That is only increased over time, and that is a challenge and something that we're always looking for better ways how to handle when we're dealing with a person in crisis.
Mm-hmm. So I remember interviewing somebody, and I can't remember who, but we talked about Stan Kowalski, the county commissioner, and that they have a new program where they send social workers out on a crisis situation. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. There's a number of agencies across the nation that are kind of taking some new initiatives for social workers, riding along with police officers, and in Washington County, and also Woodbury, they're doing a pilot program. A program similar to what other agencies have done with the social worker riding along with law enforcement officers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so the face of crime, what do you think, nationally and locally? What do you see? Since you were starting out as a patrolman, what do you see, the changes in the crime field?
Yeah, well, part of it is just kind of the change in times, the technology, the cell phones, social media. Those things, I think, have created a platform for if there's a feud between people. It's not like back in the day when you didn't have that. It'd be phone calls or physically driving to find people's locations. Now, with how quick information's sent through social media, it seems like a propensity for violence and shootings.
Yes.
And guns. So that's a challenge, something that we've been dealing with over the last several years. There's been an increase in gun-related crimes, and so it's a challenge. Going through these new things that are affecting Oakdale.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and every day you read in the paper about crimes that were committed. Somebody pulled a gun, and the person who they pulled the gun on is shooting back at them. What is going on with the gun situation? Why is this happening?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I don't think any of us have the answer. I will say this is that we feel fortunate that the Washington County Attorney's Office does a pretty good job with holding people accountable when we do catch them. Mm-hmm. And I would argue that from a law enforcement point of view that is a big key for us. We need prosecutors that are going to follow through and hold people to account.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but the fact is, more people have guns. I mean, why is that? Are they defending or being aggressive?
Well, when it comes to a bigger picture, I don't have the answer for you. But
okay.
From a smaller perspective, just on the point of view for Oakdale, I would say a lot of the gun crimes that we would deal with are typically younger people. For example, the most recent one we had was a drive-by shooting, and that was teenage kids that are just having a propensity for violence, and that's how they problem solve their situation versus a fist fight like it might have been 20 years ago. Now it seems like guns are the new way of handling business.
Isn't that terrible? It's just
it
terrible.
Is.
Okay, the other thing is, in far as is cameras. Everybody's got a camera on their building, and I think that's so important for you people, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, we that's how we solve cases. We rely on people providing information, and that's one thing we really look forward to. Hopefully in the future we'll be able to have a better process for businesses and homeowners that have cameras to find an easy way for them to provide that information to us. Mm-hmm. And that's something we hope to figure out as we get body cameras and we go to a new digital evidence storage system.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I was just talking to a friend of mine the other day about a banker, as a matter of fact, and we were talking about years ago, all banks had cameras, but they were so grainy and so awful, you couldn't tell if it was your own mother, right? You couldn't tell who it is. But how things have changed in the field, right?
Yeah, some of the high quality resolution cameras that are out there are amazing. So that's really helping us too, is
Sure.
being able to identify people.
Mm-hmm.
But COVID doesn't help when people are wearing masks and
Yeah, that's true.
conceals their identity.
But even then, it seems like you people seem to analyze well enough that you can, they're catching crooks all the time in St. Paul, Minneapolis, right? I mean, due to the camera work and cameras, people's cameras on their doorbells and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, the reality is that a lot of these people committing these crimes, it's a small percentage of our population. And, you know, we have a network of law enforcement professionals that share information, intel, and some of these people that are committing crimes in St. Paul, Minneapolis are doing the same, you know, all over the metro. And so working together, that's really how we solve those crimes.
Okay. So in getting back to Oakdale, we're going to have a lot of growth coming in the very near future. The north end of Oakdale, there's 2,200 new homes going in, and around the whole area. The bus line over on the south end of town. So then what is that going to do for the crime? Is that, I mean, just the fact that you're going to have more people there. So is that going to be a more increase in crime?
You know, I guess you could say that anytime that there's going to be more people, more traffic, there's going to be more crime. What type of crime that's going to bring to Oakdale, that's something we don't know. So yeah, it's the Gold Line project that's coming in on the south end of the city. Like I said, it's going to bring in more vehicles, more housing, more people. So those are all things that we'll gauge over time and determine if we need to provide different resources or take new strategies in how we're policing.
Okay. Okay. So and so that's how you plan to adjust for that. You're thinking ahead. You're tentatively working on this, correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So okay. Well, we're almost out of time here, and I just want to mention that we just heard this morning that our good friend Pete Orpett, the district attorney for Washington County, passed away last night, apparently. And do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, I'm sure you worked with Pete over the years. I know I have, and he's just a wonderful person. So do you have any thoughts on the passing of Pete Orpett?
Yeah, just very sad. Just terrible news. Pete was a good man, well respected in his field, and he was an advocate for law enforcement. And you know, he just did so much good for our communities, and he's going to be missed.
Absolutely. He was a no-nonsense man, wasn't he?
Yes, he just had this charisma. He'd come in and just light up a room.
Absolutely. Wonderful man.
Yeah.
We're sorry about his passing. But
Yeah.
Okay, well, we are out of time, and I want to thank you so much for joining us on Oakdale Update.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.